Is another episode of Artisans of Steel. This is a conversation podcast with myself, Marco Malmasi, and I talk to some of the leading. Oop, jeez, what a faux pas! Got to turn my phone on silent. Uh, the leading knife makers in our current times, new makers as well as living legends. We have a living legend today, Mr. Steve Schwarzer, and I call him Pop. And you guys will know why as we get on in our conversation. But before we get on with anything else, I gotta give some love to our super sponsors for the Patreon. If you are interested in getting access to these conversations first, they hang out on the Patreon, they live on the Patreon. You can go back and reference them on the Patreon. They live there first though, and you have first access over on the Patreon, as well as tons of other benefits. And so, first shout out goes to Maritime Knife Supply. You can find them on Instagram at Maritime Knife Supply. They are in Atlantic, Canada. They're a great resource for knife making supplies. You can also check them out at maritimenifesupply.com. We have Mr. Gabe Fletcher, my friend and owner of Anchorage Brewery. He is also the forger at Anchorage Forge. You can go find more information about Anchorage Brewery and their beers and the collaboration beers. I actually got a collaboration beer. I had one come out a couple weeks ago with them. It was an imperial stout, triple oaked imperial stout, and now we have an IPA coming out. A little bit lower octane, but still super delicious. You can find them and more information about them at Anchorage Brewing on Instagram. Next, we have Mr. Tony Stasma of TNT Forge. You can go check him out. Excuse me, go check him out. Check out his work. He's doing phenomenal Damascus work. He gets really great finishes. He's a great guy and a good follow. So go give Tony some love over on Instagram. Make sure you follow him at TNT Forge. TNT. I just realized I sounded like it was saying T and T. No, it's TNT Forge. All right, next we have Brian Hennenkamp. He's Tortuga Blade Works. You can find him on as at Tortuga Blade Works on Instagram. He's a great knife maker. He's learned a lot and has come really far in a short period of time. He's worked with great makers like Jason Knight, and it really shows because the level and quality of his work is extremely high. He's also a fellow pizzaiolo. If you don't know what that means, it means people who are obsessed with pizza. And we were actually talking today about pizzas and making pizza. And he lives a little bit north of me. He's a couple hours north of me, and we're talking about trying to get together and doing some pizza. So that'll be fun. And if anybody else is local to the area or happens to be in the area, we'll make sure that folks know. All right, next we have Mr. Josh Weston. He is Josh A. Weston on Instagram. Very talented graphic designer and marketing expert, turned bladesmith and knife maker. You can find him also as at Dragon Forge Experience on Instagram, where he tours around with a flock of dragons. I don't know what you would call it, a group of dragons, a rookery of dragons. Um, but you can their forges built and designed to look like dragons, and you can go and forge with him and have a good time. So go check him out, Josh A. Weston, and also at Dragon Forge EXP. Next, we have Michael Poor of Red Dragon Forge. Good friend, talented maker. He just lives a couple hours north of me. Also, Sephiri lives on the other side of the body of water called the Puget Sound. He lives on the Olympic Peninsula in a beautiful area. Go check him out, Red Dragon Forge. Also another talented cook. Also another person we need to get together. Maybe do some pizza and barbecue. And maybe, I don't know. I think my place is kind of the center of everything. So maybe everybody's just gonna have to come to me. And then lastly, we have Russell Tinsley. He is Can't Make Knives on Instagram, as well as Ouzel Finch Beers, and then at Nost Brewing Project. You can go check him out on any of his pages, especially the beer pages. Go follow and see what they do. They make some really incredible and high octane and also very delicious beers. They don't taste like high octane beers, which is kind of dangerous because they go down super quick and easy, and three deep, and you're filling them for sure. So go check them out again. Can't Make Knives, Ouzel Finch Beers, and at Nost Brewing Project. Okay, my guest today is, like I said, he is a living legend, but he's also my pop. He's my adopted grand. Doesn't feel aged by that. He's a great guy. He's been an awesome mentor. I talked to him not only about knife making, but also just about life in general often. And so I'm sure we'll get into some of those things and those aspects in this conversation. And I'm going to bring him on in here. Maybe. Let's see. There we go. Okay.
Is
this thing on? And so, oh, I just popped him back out. Hold on, let me get him back in here. I don't know what's going on. My service is really
here.
slow.
I am.
Here you are. Okay. I present to you, everybody, Mr. Steve Schwarzer. He's one of the most talented guys to date. I mean, he has some of the most mileage, I think, in our modern renaissance of custom knife making. To this day, he's been around since before the ABS, and he's still kicking ass and passing on his knowledge and extending his legacy. And I'm very thankful to you, Steve, for joining me today to share in this conversation. And I look forward to picking your brain a little bit. We also got some questions towards the end, but if you don't mind jumping in and just giving us a short background. I will say real quick that we're not going to get super deep into it because, Josh, you had a great interview conversation with Josh Smith on the Josh Smith podcast. You also had a great conversation with Jeff Fader on the Full Blast podcast. And if folks want to get more in depth, they can definitely go there. But I'd just like to touch lightly on kind of some of your upbringing, what life was like at home, and how you kind of tapped into some of those creative outlets. I mean, I think naturally humans are creative and curious, and I'm curious to understand and know a little bit about your upbringing and how those things were nurtured for you as you were starting to find your way eventually into knife making.
And I was raised, my dad was a really good guy. We didn't get on as friends until I was probably 40, and I realized what he'd sacrificed to keep our family together. And sure. I love my daddy, and I got along with him well after I was older. But he was a mechanical genius. That guy built airplanes in our backyard and would disassemble things, put them on trailers, and they'd ship them off me and sell them and make a few bucks. But he worked for aircraft manufacturing company, and he had really good mechanical skills that I did not inherit. Now, the metalworking part of it, I could do that pretty well, but he always got an example as a hard-working guy.
That's good.
And of course, I did metal shop in school, and
sure.
First piece of hot steel I ever hit was in the 7th grade. I did a chisel, and there's kind of a little side story about that. There was a shop teacher named Joe Hodge. And Joe Hodge, I think he's still alive, but I ran him down back when I helped David Jerome with that custom folders book. I wrote the mosaic chapter for it.
Right.
And I did that part. And that I'd done a cold chisel in this guy's class. I might have got a C on it. I don't know. I don't remember. But they protect those guys like they're ex-presidents. You can't get to a teacher hardly at all that's retired. I mean,
Sure.
They're really protected. Their home, life and all that stuff's protected. Anyway, I used some assets I had, and I finally ran the guy down. And he was so good to me. Anyway, I got this guy on the phone. I said, "Mr. Hodge, is that you?" And he said, "Yes, sir." I said, "This is Steve Schwarzer." I said, "Do you remember me?" He said, "Oh, yeah, I remember you." I thought, oh, man, I hope it wasn't all bad. It wasn't. Anyway, I sent him a copy of that book, because that hot steel planted a seed in me that grew into what I am now.
Yeah.
And it's just, I've always had an affinity for metals, and I like it. I like working with it. A lot of different metals. done some
Before
cool stuff.
Yeah, you definitely have, and we're gonna get into those. Before you started playing with metal, did you do any other kind of creative work in creating stuff with like clay or wood or
I
other
did some
mediums?
carving. I did a good bit of carving. Uh, I didn't get into clay sculpture until probably I was in my 20s. I played
Okay.
with it a little bit. I didn't follow that much, but there's a couple of different. But I did sculpt some table, and one of the things that happened to me when my dad he moved on a project to California, and I didn't have any real friends. I mean, we were raised in this little tiny tight neighborhood, and we had no introduction to any other culture at all, none. And I went to California, and I fell in with the ties and uh, and Tui Tamas and the Salanoa family out in Oxnard and Port Hueneme area, and then those
Okay.
guys just took me under the wing and protected me.
That's
And
great.
it was so funny. I
Samoans,
just taught a class in
right?
California
Yeah.
up at Santa Ynez Valley up on the Chumash Reservation. And one of those childhood friends, Ben Tai, came up and spent 3 days with me to see me do what I do. And we had
Right.
the best time. First time we've been face to face in 30 years. But I
Wow.
wouldn't be sitting here talking to you if it wasn't for that guy. He saved me several
Yeah.
times in the course of our history as kids. I never forgot it. He was kind to me, and his family took me in and raised one of their own, and I loved every minute of it. But anyway, that's kind of
Incredible.
how that got started.
Yeah, and you moved to California from Texas, right?
Yeah, we were raised in Texas, and then I moved to California, and we were out there about 3 years.
Okay.
And my dad was working on a government project, and then he worked for a big aircraft company. And then we
It's cool.
came back, and then I did that for a little while. I actually
Okay.
was on the team that built the first 747 vertical stabilizer. I built some pressure domes for Saturn rockets. I worked on F-8s, A-7As and E's, military aircraft. And then
Yeah.
I decided that wasn't going to be my calling, so I went to Florida.
What took you out to Florida? Work?
I hadn't been there before, and I
That was it?
always had. Yeah, that was it. I hadn't been to Florida, and everybody laughs at, well, why'd you go to Florida? Well, I had to get out of Texas till the statute of limitations ran out, kind of thing. No, I'm just kidding about that. But anyway, I went to Florida. My dad had a friend down there, and he offered for me to visit. I went there, fell in love with it, and that was in '70, and
Mhm.
I wound up working on line crews. I did radio tower work. I did a bunch of stuff. And then in '72, I got a job working out of Boilermakers local in Jacksonville, Florida, 199. And they had iron ship fitters, Boilermakers, and blacksmiths. And there were no blacksmiths left in the local. And I was curious about it. There wasn't anybody to talk to. So I bought a book by Alex Beeler on art of blacksmithing, and there was a page and a quarter in there on forging knives, and it lit a fire in me that never went out. I was like, the next day I was hunting an anvil. I still have that anvil, and
Oh,
I've got the
nice.
sister to it in my shop. I've been using those anvils all these years, and
Wow.
they'll be in the yard sale when I die. You and Neil can fight over them.
No, yeah, I was like, those aren't going in a yard sale. That's either coming to my house or Neil's house.
But yeah, I started forging blades. I made a lot of simple knives and made a lot of fillet knives, and it was just like I didn't really know much about it. I was just reading,
Sure.
and everybody says, well, you can't destroy an anvil. Yeah, you can if you hot cut crosscut saw blades with a cold chisel on the face of your anvil. It doesn't do it much good. Anyway, I was making these fillet knives, and my friends all told me I was wonderful, so I assumed that I was.
Sure.
Anyway, that L6 steel they're made of very forgiving on heat treat. So I made a bunch of these fillet knives for the offshore guys. They catch kingfish, stuff like that, and it worked. And it cut better than anything you could buy.
Sure.
And so there was a fellow on a job named Bobby Tyson, and he's one of my, and always will be, And I heard about him, and I went up to him, and he was sitting at lunch at a big old acid tank. And I walked up there, and what was in my head at that age was, I'm going to show this guy something about making knives, because my friends told me I was wonderful. So I assumed that I did. You see this
And
every day.
what age were you at the time? Were you
Huh?
about mid?
I was
Were you about
Boilermaking. I
Were you
was
about
in
mid-20s?
Florida, and this was up at White Springs, Florida. It's way up in
Okay.
the north in a phosphate mine. And
Yeah.
we were working up there building a bunch of big tanks and stuff. And so I walked up to this guy who was a pipe fitter, and I said, "You Bobby Tyson?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I hear you make knives." And he pulled out the most beautiful little pocket knife I ever saw that walked and talked. It would fit with any slip joint maker today.
Oh,
And he
wow.
could make 2 a day of those things. And I was trying
Holy
to
smokes.
turn my back to him so he wouldn't see what I had in my pocket. I didn't want him to see that stuff. And all I can tell you is he was kind to me,
Yeah.
because I had my hammer handle that I'd put on there for handles kind of thing. And I was using 1/4-inch rivets. I was stealing the ground wires off of telephone poles and using them for copper rivets. Anyway, he says,
Not a bad move.
I have books on making knives. And I said, "You have what?" "They're books on making." "Yeah, where do you have these books?" He said, "Well, in my library." "Where do you live?" "In Jacksonville." And I said, "No. Where's the address?" And then he messed up. He invited me up.
Ah,
There.
yeah.
I went, and one weekend, I jumped 5 years in my
Wow.
skill sets by being
Yeah.
with that guy. And I never have forgotten, and I never will forget him. And
Sure.
what's funny now is the shoes on the other foot. He
Oh, yeah.
only forges blades now. He only
Okay.
makes skinners. That's funny. But
Wow.
anyway, I love the guy, and I can't thank him enough for what he did for me.
Absolutely. That's incredible. It's cool that you mentioned your shop teacher. I just in the last month ran into my wood shop teacher from high school. When I was at first time I used a bandsaw and a table saw and skills like that, I was probably about 12 or 13 years old. And that was in middle school. And in high school, I went to another level with table saws and all kinds of different hand tools and whatnot to do the woodworking. But I saw my shop teacher, and I, a technique that I use for drawing things out, some of my schematics, and especially when I'm trying to estimate materials and stuff like that, um, I learned in his class. And so I actually just had drew up an example for somebody else, for another knife maker, trying to help him out with some stuff. And I pulled up the pictures and I showed up and I was like, "Do you recognize these?" And I hadn't seen him in 20 years. And he's like, "Yes, I do." And we stood there and we had a great conversation. And yeah, like I said, I hadn't seen him in about 20 years. He wants to try to get me into the school now, to come talk about. They have a material science program still, which is great, where kids get to melt down metals, precious metals, and learn about brazing and soldering, all kinds of. I don't think they really do much forging. They might do some forging actually. Not quite sure, but they want me to come in, and so it'll be
Man,
cool to
don't miss
get
the
connected with that.
opportunity to plant seeds when you can.
Right? Yeah, I've been trying to do that for a long time, but um, so so you met sorry, what was his name again? Bob?
Say again?
You met Bob, the folder maker?
Yeah, but Bobby Tyson. Yeah, and he
Bobby
taught
Tyson.
me to make folding knives. I made
Right.
probably 20 before I didn't have to sell a pair of pliers with them to open them, because the springs
Oh.
weren't as strong. And people ask me, "Why is this knife stiff?" I said, "Well, it's a manly knife. If you can't open it, you don't need it."
You probably
And
don't
then I
deserve to use
learned,
it.
how to manipulate them and make them work. I finally got to where I could make a pretty decent folder. But
Well, I
yeah,
mean, you've made some beautiful folders for sure.
oh,
We'll show some of those
I've
later.
done that. And a matter of fact, at one of the recent knife shows, I just bought back one of my fancy automatics that I built
Oh,
with all
really?
the mosaic. Yeah, because I forgot how to make them. I bought it back so I could take it
So you
apart
can
and
take
look
it
at it. And
I got you.
yeah. Anyway, that's the problem when you get at this stage of the game. You got a big file to dig through to find stuff, and sometimes I don't remember
Sure.
where I put it.
Yeah. Well, and you've been doing some work recently with Andreas Kalani, right? To help kind of
Oh,
go through some of that. building
Oh,
up your
absolutely.
website, and you got a book that you want to put out eventually, right?
Yeah, I've had a manuscript done for 30 years. As a matter of fact, the guy that helped me put it together he's 80 something. He was here the other day and he gave me his copy and he said, "You need to hurry."
Wow.
Anyway,
Yeah,
I said, "Okay, I will." But it's still relevant, but I'm trying to gather up photographs of older working stuff. I had,
sure.
you got to be careful not putting all your eggs in one basket, or sometimes you'll drop the whole basket. And that's kind of what happened with my photographs. Now I got to recreate all that.
I got you.
But and then I have another book in mind to do.
Sure.
But what happens is you get so busy. I mean, it seems like the older I get, the busier I get. You know that old parable about the grasshopper and the ants. The grasshopper played all summer, and then he had to go live
Yeah.
with the ants to get by the winter. Well, I
Right.
am that parable.
It's all right.
Yeah.
I think with each other's support, we can make these happen.
Oh, absolutely.
I think
That's
it'd be
why I
really
count
cool.
on you young people. You really got to drive, and it's fun hanging out with you because you're doing so much neat stuff.
Yeah. Trying. We're trying, man. Trying to keep that legacy going. So you're working with Bobby Tyson and you're learning folders, and then what happens after that? What year is that in? About
Oh,
the
that
mid
was in the
'70s, correct?
70s. That was
Right.
I made my first folders in probably 77 or 78.
Okay. So this is
Uh,
still before the ABS,
this was pre-ABS stuff.
right?
And I started using an electrical mark on my knives in 81. So anything that's hand stamped is before that time.
Interesting.
And I did a lot of work with Pendray on the Woots project in the initial stuff,
Sure.
discovery of that. And
Yeah.
that was a lot of fun. And then, but pattern development is what drives me. It's
Me
like
too.
you are. I mean, you've
Yeah.
got huge skill sets with it. I'm always amazed at some of the stuff you do, and
Mm,
it's pretty neat. You guys are developing some really nice techniques for making stuff happen, and I try to follow that. I try to keep up with you, but it's
good.
hard. It's hard. There's
No,
too many of you.
no, we just got to get a few of us together. I think that'd be a good
Yeah.
move. Um, so how? All right. So I'm trying to figure out the timeline. So this is before the ABS. You're
Right.
working with Al Pendre. Real quick, I'll pop up a photo of you with Al Pendre. So you're on the left, correct?
Yeah, that's me on the left. I was short and fat. Now I'm tall and handsome, and that's Pendray in the middle.
Yep.
And that's Daryl Meyer. And Daryl and Alfred were primary drivers in my development. Daryl Meyer, I didn't ever work with him like hands on, but maybe just a
Yeah.
tiny little bit. But his intellect, and he would say, "Well, why don't you make something?" And then he would give you basically an idea. It's kind of like you do with your patterns. You hand them these guys and say, "Go make that." And then
Yeah.
they after they try 2 or 3 times, they're going, "Well, I've got the drawing here, but it's not working." They don't know what's in your head. And
Hmm.
Daryl would do that to me, only he would give you a verbal thing. He would say, "Do this," and you go do it, and you come back. He said, "Well, I thought that would work," and well, it did work, Daryl. Here it is, kind of thing. Or
Yeah.
I'd do something on my own. I'd be all excited. I'd be like a puppy jumping up and down, and I'd run up to him with it, and oh, that's nice. Yeah, I got a piece of that laying on my bench from 5 years ago. That's that was a that was a guy. I've got the first radial pattern that was ever done, and it was done by Daryl Meyer. I've got a piece
Oh
of it.
wow. I would
Yeah,
love to see that.
he was a genius, and he still is. The guy is he did more for pattern welding than almost anybody I know back in the old days.
Yeah.
And one of the things I did, I used to visit his shop, and I walked by there, and he had a bunch of old dies and stuff. He was as disorganized as I am, maybe worse. And there was a
Probably just like
pair of
me then too. Great.
there was a pair of
I'm
square
in the
dies
same
laying
club.
in a barrel, and I picked them up. And I showed them to Daryl. I said, "What is this?" He said, "Oh, that's nothing." I threw it back in the barrel, and when I went by the next time, he'd thrown a rag over them. He didn't want me to see those things. Well, I went home and made me a set. You've got a picture of them somewhere. But
I
anyway,
do got a
that's
picture of 'em. They're right here.
where we can, yeah, those were made with a bandsaw. They were actually
gotcha.
made with a bandsaw and a cutting torch, and you can see the die face on the front of that thing. That was a die I had that was left over. I needed that block to tie it to my hammer, so I just cut the die off
Right.
and welded it onto the thing. Been rebuilt.
Yeah.
Those have been running since 1982.
Wow.
They were made for my air hammer, but those dies have existed since 1982, and that's what those dies are directly responsible for that shooting scene that I did. But Daryl Meyer is the driver. I was making all these patterns and having good success. And he said, well, why don't you make something real? And so that's where the shooting scene came from. I made that. And to show Daryl. And when he looked at it, I almost weep about it now. It hit me so hard. Yeah. He said, sometimes the student exceeds the master. And I thought, coming from him, that's probably the best compliment I'll ever get in my life, and I still feel that way about it.
That's incredible.
It was a tremendous piece of work, not because I did it. It was just working out. What we do is problem solving. That's what people don't understand. There's not a recipe. You give out recipes all the time, but there's very few many people can bake a cake like you do. Right. It's because they don't have the passion for it, and that's what drives me. It's the discovery process. That's why I've got tubs full of half bars of mosaic laying in my shop, because I'm done with that. I made a knife out of it. Let's make another pattern for the next knife. It's a trap. Yeah. You can't make any money, but you can have a good time.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And I'm right there with you. I completely agree. I have more patterns in my brain and on paper in notebooks and journals than I have the time to make. And I've started playing with the idea of kind of putting some of this stuff out there to help people, and to probably kind of a select group of people who I know will at least be, give me credit for the inspiration for the pattern and stuff like that.
Well, that's a big deal. You need to remember the people that helped you, and when you help somebody, they should remember you. It shouldn't be, well, hey, look what I did. Well, no, you didn't. You got that from some. We're all standing on the backs of giants.
I was just going to say
Fogg and Schmidt and Pendray and Daryl Meyer and Jimmy Schmidt. Yeah. All these guys doing these cutting tests in their shop, they have no idea where that came from. That was Jimmy Fikes. Jimmy Fikes did the first of it. He was the guy that put the cigarette in a shell case and would snip the thing off and cut through the book. I got a videotape of him cutting. There wasn't anybody that cut better than Jimmy Fikes. And still might not be.
Sure.
He just passed away here like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But he was the guy that started all the cutting tests for the ABS.
I got you. Is Daryl Meyer still with us?
Yeah. As far as I know, I hadn't heard different.
Yeah. My first Blade show, I was actually back to back with Daryl. And
that's a good place to be.
Well, the problem is I didn't know who he was.
That's a shame.
So it is a goddamn shame, because I didn't get one chance to talk to him. And he always had people coming up and talking to him at the table, but I didn't know who he was. I was ignorant, new maker. I think at that time, that was in 2015, my first time at Blade Show. I was, what was it? Yeah. I'd only been making knives on my own really for a couple of years.
Right.
Maybe 2 or 3 years. And so I was still, I have friends who at the time were, had been making knives and been deep in the industry for a long time. And they throw names out there like Jimmy Fikes or Daryl Meyer. I'm like, I have no idea who you were talking
Nobody knew who they were.
Yeah. And so part of the reason why I really want to have you as part of this conversation is to kind of, and I kind of did this with JD Smith as well. But to kind of get your understanding of the history of our or at least our more modern pattern welding and knife making renaissance, and who were some of the pioneers of this movement, and especially when it comes to the Damascus. Like I feel like there's a lot of either unknowns or conflicting stories, and I would love to hear your take on a little bit of the history of pattern welding especially in the United States, as far back as your familiar in our more modern times.
Oh, sure. Back when we were on Noah's Ark, there was only a couple of us on there.
Were you bedded down next to the giraffe, right?
Oh, it's so funny. There were a few knife makers in the U.S. Of course, Randall was forging at the time. The old man, the young guy, he doesn't care about that. And then there was Skagel up there. Bill Skagel was doing some stuff. And there was a bunch of guys around that were much older than me. They were like 10 years older than me that were making knives and doing pretty good, that were not machinists. And of course, when the machine tool guys got in it, they gave us that dreaded disease called the ricasso. Nothing had a ricasso on it until the machinist got involved, and then everything was precision. But there was Don Hastings. He was down in Palestine, Texas. And of course, Bill Moran, love him or not, that guy popularized the material. In I think it was 76, he showed up at the Guild Show with it and set the world on fire. And it was 512 layers, and occasionally he'd make a piece of ladder pattern or something.
Right.
At the same time, Daryl Meyer and that crew, they were doing Merovingian patterns with multiple bars and all that stuff, but they didn't get any notice because they were doing academic research. They weren't in it to make knives. They were in it to do pattern development. Of course, they were studying all the gun barrel technology and the liège and all that. And Bill and Hastings and Bill Bagwell and all of them, they were welding and doing stuff. But that art was never lost. That's what a lot of people think it was lost. And no, that pattern welded has never stopped being made. Woots, maybe. And the reason I say maybe is because there's always some guy sitting up in a hole in a mountain somewhere that has not stopped making that stuff.
Right.
And I learned a valuable lesson about that a while back. I was writing an article about a pattern that I thought I had developed. But actually, there was a guy in Indonesia that had been making that stuff, and he died in 92. I don't know whether he learned it from his grandfather or his grandpa, but it was exactly not something like what I was doing. It was exactly what I was doing. So I had to reevaluate all that.
Died in 92. He must have family. It'd be interesting.
You have to know. And there's no way for me to research that because I have to go to Indonesia and do that. But it's just like the Woot stuff is when you're working that material, it's a cultural thing. How it was worked, it has to be worked very, very slowly and multiple heats. And it's our buddy Peter Burt makes a bunch of it, and then Ray Rybar makes a load of it, and he really understands the material. I just taught a class with him in California, and that guy has got a head full of knowledge that it needs to be in a museum. We made steel from wrought iron. We made steel from mild steel. We did a burn and did the whole melt process, direct reduction. We did reduction and melting in crucibles. We did all of that out there at this hammer. And if anybody ever gets a chance, they want to know the basics of the old way, Ray Rybar is your guy. But anyway,
that's very interesting.
Pendray and I developed of it, but we were reading these old papers and all the stuff, and you're reading what people who didn't understand it, what was going on. It was their perception. They're looking through a window. They see very clearly what they see, but they don't understand why. And for instance, is there was a British guy who was talking about him putting green leaves in the crucible and putting clay around the top of the crucible. Well, the green leaves convert to carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide and help the melt temperature as part of the chemistry of the thing. And you would think, well, green leaves in a 3,000 degree crucible and they turn to carbon and nothing. What do they do? It's witchcraft. Right. No, it's not. It's chemistry. But once you understand that chemistry, then you can make it happen. But I won't get down that rabbit hole. That's an endless tunnel with no light. That's what that is.
Yeah. So go ahead.
I'm just like a kid with a flashlight. You'll have to jerk me around by the head a little bit every once in a while because I get off sidetracked.
Sure thing. I'll tug on your bit. And so that was a horse reference, by the way. I'm not tugging on any other parts.
That's all right. I'm probably fit more in the jackass realm, but
Oh, a donkey. All right. Um, so Bill Moran popularized it, but like you said, pattern welding had been around for hundreds of years. I mean, honestly, as far as
about 6,000 years. And
yeah,
here's mine.
let's hear it.
Not to run over you, but
Oh no, it's perfect.
when you first make that steel, you have to fold it to clean it. That's
Yep.
when it comes out of the bloomery. If you got to fold it to clean it. And so what happened, this is my short version of it, is they would clean this stuff up, and one of the smiths there looks at, man, that's got a little pattern in the side of it. Well, along and along, there'd be a guy over the mountain working a different ore vein that had a different alloy in it, and he would be making steel, and he'd have a little bit left over, and the guy sends over there and says, hey, we're a little short. We've got to make like 15 grubbing hoes or 15 swords for a battle coming. Can you spare a little steel? And the guy says, yeah, okay. So he sends it over, and they start welding it, and there's some kid like you in the crowd that goes, man, that's making a pattern. If you do this, it'll do that. Or if you do this, it'll do that. And that's how that started.
Yeah.
Well, there were, at the time that, quote, pattern welded was invented in the United States, yada, 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 there were 40 guys in the 40s and 50s around Ocala, Florida alone that were making pattern weld material because they were recycling all this old farm equipment and stuff into hammers and tongs and whatever they needed. If you put acid on it, it's pattern welded. It's the same way with these old scarf welds. They're 6,000 years old. You want to join two pieces of steel, you put a taper on it, you drive it together. It doesn't have to be exactly at 35 degrees or 45 degrees. You just knock a thing and you weld it. And you can weld, it's a good technique and it works. It's generic.
Yeah, and pattern welding, even around through Indonesia and Java and India, even. I mean, the gun barrels that came out of India, and then the culture of barrel making in what is this? Wasn't Sweden or Germany? Can't remember, but even through World War II, they were still making Damascus.
Oh yeah, I know those guys. I knew, and I worked with Manfred Zoxa and those guys. I taught at the National Forge Museum in '93, and presented papers on my work, and also presented papers for Dr. John Verhoeven on carbon diffusion in Damascus steel. And it's because he didn't have time to do it. Him and Pendray were doing the Woots thing, and they asked me if I would present the papers, which is, I didn't do any of the research. Another guy did it. I just talked about it.
Sure.
I talked about my work there. But those guys, Zoxa worked directly with those guys that were working in World War II that were making pattern weld. That stuff had never stopped being made, ever, since the beginning. I've seen blades out of Toledo, Spain, that you could literally pull them around tip to butt, and they'd spring, and they were pattern welded.
Right.
And so, I mean, steel production is an amazing thing. That's one of the things I learned so much from Rybar about things that I assumed and things I'd done, but I didn't have a complete understanding of what I was doing. I was just getting a result, but I didn't understand why it was doing what it was doing. I just knew how to make it do that. And that was one great things that he clarified a bunch of the scientific stuff because he's got access to this multi-million-dollar testing equipment. He knows the guy who do that.
That would be incredible to work. Now I want to get down to that hammer next year.
You don't want to miss it. If you get a chance to go spend time with that guy, it's worth every penny you can spend to go there.
And you were mentioning before that in Carbondale there was a group of makers like Daryl Meyer and a couple other folks.
I forget. I think Farini was involved with him. I know who's the guy. Dang it, I can't remember his name. He ran the ornamental iron museum for Bannock for years.
Okay.
That's the problem with getting this age. My Filofax is full, but there was a bunch of them there, and there was a couple of guys. I'm trying to remember that other young man's name. He made vessel. Rick, I think Rick Smith was his name. I don't think he was in the Carbondale bunch, but he was near there, and and that comes to another little sidebar. It's a funny story. It's like 82,
Yeah.
and we were up at Schloss Furnace up there in Birmingham, big steel production thing. It's shut down.
Okay.
And we were up there, and a guy, I was doing some mosaic work at the time, and this young guy walked up to me, and he says, he wanted to ask me how I did a pattern, and I was a little bit put out by that. I thought he just wanted a recipe, and I said, well, I just wad it up, and it comes out like that. Daryl being the statesman he was, he says, no, you don't understand. He said, show him your ticket. That's what he told this young fellow. And I said, what the hell's a ticket? And well, you know where you saw a slab off the end of a mosaic bar?
Right.
That's a ticket.
Yeah.
And so this guy hands me this ticket, and it's got these little chrome stairways going right up to this mosaic center in it. I went, come with me, boy. We got to talk. We went on and sat down and had the best conversation. But he makes vessels out of it, and does all kinds of things with stone and mosaic stuff. He made a mosaic park bench with jelly rolls. The dang jelly rolls are this big.
Whoa. Yeah.
All pattern welded park bench. Yeah.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, it's like I could have made knives out of that for about 10 years.
Sure. Well,
and that find a park bench.
I remember us having a conversation in the past, and in at some point you brought up the ticket situation, and you said there were at Blade Show there'd be a group of guys who'd get together, or other hammer-ins and whatnot, and to become part of the conversation, you had to bring your ticket, and you brought something to share.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Well, you can. All I can tell you is you can get into any concert that happens with your ticket.
Well, and
there's so much development going on, and there's so many bright minds in this business. It's just incredible. I mean, it's and of course we got this instant gratification like we're doing now. You know, doing your podcast and stuff. This reaches about 10 times more people than a magazine will ever reach. And it's because it's instant access and you can hear it from the source. It's not taking anything away from the magazines, but everybody now it's all about the different social media stuff. And a lot of guys that kind of got on me said, you know, you're 75 years old. Why are you doing all this stuff? I said, because that's where the action is. That's just where the development is. This is how I learn. I'm in a constant state of being a student. I learn all the time. I just had a young guy here. He's just tremendous, brilliant mind. He does slackline stuff. He walks across a thing that looks like a fire hose, 2,000 feet in the air over a canyon.
Holy
and he makes
shit.
Beautiful stuff. I mean, and he's afraid of heights. I don't believe him, but he says he's afraid of heights. But I had him here for a week, and we had the best time I've had in a long time.
I believe it.
Yeah, super stuff.
Yeah, it's really incredible, and I get that too. I get pushback every once in a while, and if for nothing else, you know, I think I've said this to you before, is that if, God forbid, for whatever reason, I'm driving to the shop or to the grocery store or home again and whatever, and I get an accident and I'm gone, what happens to everything that's up here? It's gone.
It's gone.
You know, I don't have enough time to write it all down in books and stuff like that. So I try to share what I can to help others, because honestly, and again, like I've said this before too, it's somewhat from a selfish standpoint as well, because I have these ideas in my head and I've done them, but I can only see so far with my lens. And it's when somebody else picks it up and then sees it from their perspective and then plays with it or makes a mistake or something and brings it back and shows me, and I see something interesting that's happened in there, then that helps build me back up and it helps re-inspire me, honestly. And I think there's, like, somebody foolishly told me, a very well-known maker, several years ago, probably about 10 years ago, he said, every pattern that's ever been made has been made. Everybody's just mixing it up and mixing up their story. I'm just like, that's got to be one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard.
It's
And
absolute nonsense.
there's just so much that there's still even we don't understand, and that even people today are innovating, whether it's Peter Swarsbert or yourself or Salem or the guys over at Kilroy's, with the 3D printed. There's a lot of people coming up with new stuff, and honestly, like the reason I understand the material so well, you talk about bringing your ticket. There's also a thing my friend Ian Rogers refers to as bladesmith tuition, and it is from making mistakes. And
Yes,
I think the reason I understand the way material moves so well is because of all the mistakes that I've made, trying to understand how that mistake was made, and then trying to figure out how to turn those lemons into limoncello. So
right.
yeah, so it's
That's
I
that
understand
old
what you're talking about from
that old saw they used to say. You know what the difference between a journeyman and a master is? It's the
what's up.
size of the mistake you can fix.
There you go.
I had Neil in my shop, and he wanted to make a layer blade without cutting and stacking.
Right.
And I said, okay, we can do it because I'd done it and
Yeah.
I knew how to do it. But the thing is when you fold it, you develop an enormous amount of blisters in there
Yeah.
in the steel itself. It's like it's like stacking a bunch of decals together and hoping you don't get air in it. You're going to get air in it,
Right. Yeah.
but you have to learn how to get them out. And I showed him exactly how to do it. And we made the blade and it cut like crazy. But
Yeah.
it's one of those things. It's just like you did with that, pushing those blocks together as hard as you did, and then moving them. Then they were totally fused. They
Yeah.
it's a really unique technique that you used, and you were thinking outside the box because you didn't have anybody telling you no, you can't do that.
Sure.
And that's where you see the greatest gains you'll see are people that are isolated most of the time, occasionally not. It's like
Yeah.
everything is problem solving. That's what all this is problem solving. And the only
Right.
weld that counts is the last one. If that last one's good, they're all good.
Yeah.
And I used to get that from Pendray all the time. It's one of the things everybody thought
Mm.
that I spent years working with Pendray. I spent 4 hours in his shop with his dad. It wasn't with him
Okay.
learning to forge weld. Everything I forge welded looked like a cabbage on a stick. Part of it would be stuck together, and part of it wasn't. It's like,
Sure.
look at my cabbage sandwich. That's going to be pattern weld one day. Well,
Right.
I went over there, and that old man showed me, and he's sitting with his back to me, looking at a steel wall, and he'd go, "It's too hot." And I'm looking around. How does he know that?
Oh,
He could see the sparks on the wall, the reflection.
I see.
He'd done it so long that he knew that. I mean, he
Yeah.
eat, sleep. There, he fed his whole family off of a coal forge and a hammer. And
Right.
that's how Pendray
Right.
was raised. He was like second, third generation horseshoe.
Sure.
And that's the guys that I got the original inspiration from. And then I ran with it. And then I found Daryl Meyer, and I found Jim Schmidt, and I found Jimmy Fox and Don Fogg and those
Right.
guys. And they all push me along. They
Yeah.
helped me get along. And now I'm finding people like yourself and Peter Burt and Ron Hardman out there at Kilroy's. Everything's growing. And so
Yeah.
you're looking at solutions to problems. And the thing at Kilroy's, that printed 3D stuff,
Yeah.
that was he and I and Ben Bannister that worked there, and Kyrie, and I still can't say her last name to save my life. But she welded the first piece of it. What we were
Oh.
doing is I was doing a canister glass, and we were printing the shapes. That
Okay.
Slacksmith picture you have,
Yep.
or that Sasquatch, was a printed shape, and we folded nickel around it and filled that up with powder.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it right there.
Right.
And that came out really nice. That was from printed stuff. But they were printing those things, and then Ron told them to print a hollow with the KW in it. I have the thing, and
Hmm.
a piece of it. And Kyrie put some powder in it, and I said, I said, what is that filament made out of? And they said, well, it's a plant-based polymer. I said, oh my gosh, I just like to fell over. I couldn't believe what I was saying. Now, let me tell you where that came from. The reason I knew that, and it was such an epiphany for
Okay.
me, is back in the day, I used to make these very complicated folders. Some of them would have 6 panels on the side, and the thing would be 4 inches long. with a center core in it. And
Sure.
I always
Like these?
put that was made that way. Always put sacrificial material on the outside of it, but you had to machine all that off. So I
Sure.
found out, I forget from who, I think it may have Daryl, that if you put burned stainless steel foil in there, none of that sacrificial material will sit. You can weld that up, and it does the job of having the extra material on. You heat it up and you weld it, and then you grind the edges, and that falls off, and you don't have to machine it off. And so I thought, well, cool. I ran out of foil. Okay, so here's where a little bit of knowledge is dangerous. What do they do in Mokame? Well, they put paper in it to divide it, to keep it from sticking. And I thought, I'll just put some copy paper in it. So I did. I cut 2 little strips of copy paper, welded the edges up, brought it up to welding heat, went under that Chambersburg and went whack, whack, whack. And I started grinding on it, and nothing happened. I just kept grinding. I said, man, there's something wrong. I stuck it in the acid, and I had a mosaic band with a center core in it all the way around. That paper had turned to carbon, lowered the eutectic level of both sides, and made a perfect weld.
Right.
That's where all the paper flowers and the tape and all that stuff in the powder canisters came from, because I knew that would disappear. Well, that plastic is paper. It's just in a plastic form. It's exactly the same thing. Turns to carbon, and the rest is history. We decided we would share that with the community for a couple of reasons. Number one, there was too many people in the room, and there's no way to hide it. And the other thing was that why not just put it out there and run with it? Because people are going to run with it anyway.
Yeah.
It's one of those old caveats. One of the guys told me, if you run into a guy with secrets, it usually means he doesn't know much. Move along.
I like that. That's cool. And I think that's definitely the right way to think about it, because beyond me being concerned, if I die or something suddenly, and everything that's in my head is no longer available to help people. It's still just the way the world has changed, even just in the last 10 years, if not, and especially in the last 20 years. And the way that us as knife makers connect with potential buyers and collectors is completely different. And especially through social media and the internet, has really opened up what we do as makers to a whole new audience that didn't know we even existed before.
It's just crazy.
Yeah, well, and I can understand even 20 years ago how people could be very protective and secretive about the things that they knew, and that's because they were only catering to, maybe an audience of from maybe 5 to 10,000 people. But now we literally have millions of people in the world who would love to get a hold of our work, but we're all so limited in what we can actually put out, just because things just take time. And so because of that,
time, and there's not enough time.
There's not enough time.
That's the thing. There's never enough time. That's why I'm teaching so much now. And so I'm passing on my knowledge, but it's also a self-serving thing. It's very self-serving, and I don't mind telling you that. Sure. It's because what happens is when you plant a seed, these guys will run off down a half a dozen different paths. They're all on fire to explore knowledge. Yeah. And I've opened up and I've shared with them without any reservation. And so normally what the response you get from those guys, if they find something, they run back and they share it with you.
Yeah.
And that's what happened with that picture you have with that motorcycle and the ones with the whales.
Yeah.
See, that was Matt Deskin. Matt, know Matt owns Volcano Knives. Matt and I go way back. I taught him powder work years ago. And what this is, that Harley Davidson in there is cut out of plates, and so was the whales. And what that was, a way to get around real expensive EDM work. It costs huge money to get stuff EDM. You can make perfect things with it. I mean,
this is the EDM.
That's EDM.
Yep.
And of course, that shooting scene that I did is all EDM work.
Right.
But the trick is not the puzzle. The puzzle is easy. The reduction, reducing that puzzle is the trick. The shooting scene with the dog and the birds and all that stuff, that's all solution. That guy started off, he was over an inch tall and now he's about a 1/4 inch tall, and he's still
Right.
perfect. If
Right.
you notice in the birds, they got little round halos around them.
Yep.
Those things were 3/4 of an inch from wingtip to wingtip. That's all the same bird. What I did is I reduced that bar. It was a 2-inch square bar down to a 1/4 inch square with a bird perfect in the middle of it. I didn't distort the birds. And then I took those and I put them in an optical comparator, ground the ends and etched them, and put a center drill in them and turned them around in a lathe. And I fitted them into a block and welded them and reduced them in scale to fit the man and the dog. And it was a solution to a problem.
Right.
But you can get a little bit of knowledge is dangerous.
Crazy.
That halo around there was a learning lesson. I had to cut that shooting scene back out of that block and put it in another block because I used 9% nickel instead of the 2% nickel that I was normally using. And when I heat treated that, the nickel went, I'm not moving, and the rest of it did. It cracked, and I had to take it out.
Oh, man.
I nearly lost that whole project. Yeah, it was terrible.
Wow.
You wouldn't want to have been around me in those days.
Sure. Here's some of the orcas.
Yeah. They're a little hard to see, but that was also a direct result of Matt's plate and powder stuff. Right. You stack the plates up. It's a real neat technique. You can get stuff lasered pretty cheap. Yeah. And so you stack those up, you tack them all together, and then you fill the thing up with powder and weld it, and then you reduce it very carefully, and you've got an element that you didn't have to spend $1,000 or $1,500 to have cut out of a solid block with EDM.
Right. And you're writing. Are you? Tell me to shut up if you're not able to talk about the article right now.
Oh, I can talk about it. I'm putting it together. I've been real slow with it because every week I get another armload of pictures from Peter out of Hawaii with stuff he's doing with that clay. It's just amazing stuff.
So tell us about the article and what it kind of, obviously.
Well, it's going to be kind of a little bit of what we're doing here. It's going to be the history of powder metal. And one of the things was the first, I was doing canisters back in 80. And so was Daryl Meyer and that bunch up there. They were fooling with it. And I'll tell you a quick, funny story on me. Well, the whole thing is problem solving. And so you're trying to keep the air off of it. And this was all solids in. There was no powder at all at that time. Anyway, I was up there figuring out how to do this. And then the air is the killer. If you can get the air off stuff, you can weld stuff at temperatures you wouldn't even believe. I mean, stainless steel will weld at 300 below zero with the oxide off of it. They found that out when they shot things into space with screw connectors. Up there in the vacuum of space, 300 below zero, that oxygen would puke off of those connectors and they would weld. If you've ever galded a stainless steel boat, you're welding at room temperature. You're actually getting new material in contact. It gets a covalent bond and it joins and it's galded. And you go, golly gee, I wish that hadn't happened, kind of thing. Anyway, so I was trying to keep this from happening. And so I came up with using a blowpipe like they're using on a lot of the titanium stuff now, where they're putting gas into the billet. And then I tried it just using a vacuum. And then what I would do is I'd weld the thing and it'd crack, and then the vacuum would suck air over the part, which defeated the purpose of it. So I thought, well, if I put nitrogen in there, it's cheap. I had a friend at the phone company. He'd throw off a couple of nitrogen bottles for me, and I'd bleed that in there and put it 2 or 3 times, and I could weld. I'd get perfect welds every time. And I thought, well, that's great. And I couldn't wait. I was so full of myself, I was just jumping. I couldn't wait to tell Daryl Meyer about my discovery. So I run up to Daryl at a show, and I'm telling him, he was real patient. He's like you. He sits there and listens to me jabber. Anyway, I was telling him all about this. I had a vacuum pump. I was bleeding nitrogen, and I was using 4 pounds, and I was doing this stuff. And all. And he went, that's nice. He said, I just put 2 or 3 drops of diesel in mine. I don't have to fool with that other stuff. Yeah. Pop my bubble. Now I'm back to using that thing again on some titanium stuff I'm working on, but it works. But anyway.
Wow.
It's all a learning curve. And then the whole thing, anything to do with pattern welding, if you can keep the oxygen off of it, it's good. Things you screw up at low heat, you can generally fix. Things you screw up at high heat, you generally cannot.
Yeah.
It's kind of a rule of thumb thing.
All right, so to back up a little bit, we've kind of gone all over the place, but I would love for you before you get no, it's perfect. It's been great. But before you kind of start getting into the article, maybe just kind of starting with your introduction to the idea of using powdered metal, and then how that's blossomed over the years and how it's kind of evolved into this article.
Okay, this started. It was in about mid '80s. It was at the first Batson hammer-in he had at his house. There was a guy there named Gary Runyon, who is a dear friend of this day, and he is basically the guy that introduced powder metal to me. And all this yapping I do, I told everybody else about it, kind of thing. But Gary's responsible for it. He was a powder metal technologist for Teledyne up there, and they made projectiles and they made carbide cutters and all that stuff. He knows everything there is to know about powder metal stuff, and he's a brilliant mind. Anyway, he was up at Batson's and he was trying to wick nickel powder and borax into a piece of cable and weld it. And I walked over there and he recognized me, he knew of me, but didn't know me. And he says, he helped me with this. I said, yeah, you put that in a tube and it'll weld. We built a canister. As far as I know, that was the first powder metal canister that was ever made in the U.S. Now,
Okay.
as far as I know, because there's always some guy that goes, oh, yeah, up in Sweden 25 years before that. You know, you always get one of those. But anyway.
I always do the
I know,
caveat too. Yeah, as far as I know.
As far as I know. Anyway, so that started it. And then what happened is I taught a class for those guys up at Teledyne, and I was able to see the whole operation. That actually I was up there a couple of times, but what happened is I came home and I wanted to do something that nobody had ever done before that I knew of, was to put my actual signature in a block. Now, they've been making names in blocks since the 1700s in the gun barrel industry, writing. Writing goes way back. Oofberg blades had writing in it, but it was engraved, inlaid. But some of it was forge welded. But anyway, it is what it is. But the actual signature had not been done. So I had a friend of mine, Joe Heidevick, take a 2-inch block and cut my name in it. Well, my mom always wanted me to be a doctor, so I learned to write like one. That was as close as I got. So my name had a bunch of loops in it, and there were little pieces that came out of there. And Joe made this block. I took it home, and I'm trying to stuff these little 10,000 pieces of sheet nickel in there, and they're not going. So I took it back to him. I said, could you cut that in half so I can use it as a die? I'm going to force that in there. Well, I crushed the block. I'm going to paraphrase Joe. Golly gee, I wish you hadn't have done that to the block, because there was hours in this block. That block was worth. If you had gone to a commercial shop and had it done, it had been $2 or $3 grand to have that thing cut. Anyway, so it was destroyed, and I said, well, can you make another one? And his response was, oh, sure, I'd love to, kind of thing. Yeah, but he wasn't too happy. So I was sitting there in his shop looking at the new block, pushing those little pieces in and out. He said, too bad we can't pour that in there. And I almost broke out in tears. I said, oh my, we can. Nickel powder.
Yeah.
And I bought a 20-gallon drum of nickel powder. I had to mortgage my house to buy that drum. It was $26 a pound. You know how many pounds are in a 20-gallon drum? There's a lot of them.
A lot.
Anyway, I'm still using now that same drum today. And it's only down about that far.
And that was back in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
And it's only down that far?
Since the mid-80s. If you use the stuff, you be careful
standard
with it.
Steel drum is about
50
gallons, right?
Yeah,
so it's probably one of those narrow drums, right?
No, it's 20-gallon grease drum. You're too young to know about those. That's the old people stuff. Know about those.
I know what the grease drums look like. I'm trying to think of the different size ones I've seen.
Yeah, it's probably 30 gallons. Maybe instead of 55.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
That's
huge.
insane.
Anyway, it was real expensive, and Joe helped me with that too. By the way, and anyway, I'm still using out of it. But I was able to pour that nickel in there and forge weld that thing perfectly. I've still got some of that bar. I use it. I'm doing a buckle for some little short Japanese guy over there in Hawaii with my name in it. He promised to wear it. If you
Well,
watch,
here
that's my other
yeah,
kid.
yeah. I got a picture of the signature right here.
Yeah, what you're seeing is that's an SEM. That's a electron microscope of that signature. That's the reason the Schwarzer is black. It reversed the colors in it, but that's
I got
my
it.
actual signature.
Wow,
And that was done on that machine up there at Gary's at Teledyne. And
that is wild. What a cool
yeah,
story. So,
that was
so
back.
that's
That was
the
mid '80s.
okay.
And
And the cable happened before that, before the
before
signature.
that, it
Okay,
was to date it. You had to find out when the first Batson hammering was at his house, and that's where it happened.
somebody just needs to give him a call. It sounds like.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. But anyway, that's the powder opened all kinds of things, but there was a big learning curve on it too, because that stuff, I don't care how tight you, I got a 118-ton press in my shop, and you can't
Right,
pack it tight enough to make it solid. It has to be reduced by 30% in order to become a solid, no matter how
right.
hard you pack it or vibrate it. That
Yeah.
that picture, that Harley you had,
Yep.
if
I'll
you
pull it back up.
look at the front wheel on it, it's collapsed a little bit. It's a little bit flat.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's because the nickel was in the spokes of it and it collapsed more than the solid pattern did. And
I
so
see.
everybody says, well, why does that wheel look like that? And I said, because Arlen Ness designed it. He's a famous motorcycle designer. You got to have some kind of line of
Yeah.
stuff to
No,
go
but
with your.
that makes sense because if you got to compress more in one direction or another, or there's basically more negative space where that powder is, it's gonna take the compression.
You got to design that in, and that
Yeah.
Hank Nickmeyer was a great guy. He worked on distortion, and he did it on purpose. So a lot of times
Sure.
he'd have these big giant mosaic billets. They'd be that big, but they'd have big
Yeah.
holes in them because he wanted this part to crush into that. He used
Interesting.
that lack of control like a weapon.
Yeah.
He made it do what he wanted. He always wanted that organic look to it. He's an art professor. He could
I
get
always
by with it.
yeah.
Hank Nickmeyer, he's another legend. That guy, he
Yeah.
did a lot of stuff, a
And
lot of neat stuff. And Huey
okay.
Bartrug did a bunch of stuff. He's the one that did the E equals MC squared, the Einstein thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Huey did a lot of really neat stuff. He was really sharp with that stuff.
I always wished I could have met Hank Nickmeyer. I only learned about his hammer in that he does, or kind of like his private get together he does at his place after Blade Show, um, a year or two too late.
Yeah, that happens. I always wanted to go out there. Doc was going out. Doc Price was in,
Oh
and
wow,
at the last Blade Show, and he was going out for a memorial service and all
yeah,
for Hank. But
right,
they all used to go out there. John Boy Richter and that bunch.
yeah,
But it was he was really good, and he was a good teacher.
yeah,
He,
yeah.
interesting guy.
He would have been an interesting guy to meet for sure. I'm always, and one of the things I love, like I said about sharing, is that I also get feedback from the stuff that I share. Because, like you were saying, when you teach, first thing people want to do is they run back and share what they've done, and I love that. And seeing that feedback and seeing how people have taken something and either misinterpreted something or did it exact same way, step by step, but then maybe they compressed in one direction more than another, and just to see and seeing that was the result, or seeing the results of that and kind of puzzling it out. I think I like puzzling out how the patterns work, and I've been fortunate. There's only a few patterns, honestly, to date that I haven't been able to puzzle out very well, and a lot of them actually are some of those ancient Javanese crisps. Some of those
Yeah,
patterns
that
that they accomplish are
those guys
pretty
were.
mind-blowing.
Oh, do you remember? You got to remember who you were up against. You
Yeah.
got 1,000 years of history, okay, and
Right.
you got a guy that's out there working in a diaper in the
Right.
jungle, okay,
They gotta
and
stay
he's
cool.
etching his blades in ant stinger juice, that formic acid. You know how many ants you have to collect to get a vat of acid to
Wow.
dip a caress in? It's a lot of ants. That's the only
Yeah.
place you get formic acid is from ants. And
Right.
so they had to collect all those ants. If you get a drop of that on you, it's like having a 50-pound ant sting you. You don't want it. It's not
Holy
good.
shit.
Yeah,
Yikes.
that's who you're competing against.
Right. Yeah, but that kind of lineage, that
Oh,
that's that's
it's
yeah.
unbelievable.
Well, and I think what's beautiful, what you're trying to do with what you are doing with your teaching and sharing is that you're you're replicating that in a helpful and meaningful way. You're doing that same thing, but just in your own way. And
I'm trying. I'm really trying because like I said, when I get around guys like yourself and like this young man I had this weekend
yeah,
or this week, it's like they're on fire
sure,
to learn stuff and they're pushing the envelope. I mean, he brought pictures of several blades he made. They're just outstanding. I mean, nearly everybody that comes to my shop anymore can out grind me. I can out pattern most of them, but
sure,
most of them, they fit and finish and stuff is really there.
yeah,
Occasionally you get some guy that's not, but I don't discount anybody. I'll tell you,
no,
I had a young guy come and he was supposed to come learn to make knives, and I went okay because I only have like one or two students at a time because I want to focus
sure,
totally on what they need.
yep,
And this guy came to my shop, and so it's like 8:30 in the morning, and I walk out and I don't hear anybody, I don't see anybody. I open my gate and he's standing there, and
okay,
he's dressed nice, and I went okay. Oh, hi, I'm Caleb. And I said okay, come on. And how old are you? 22. I said okay. How'd you get here? Oh, my mom dropped me off. I went all right then. Smart guy, really was. He just
oh,
turns
that's
out his
great,
mom, and he has a place in Alaska, but he also his mom has a place in Orlando, and he was down, and she brought him up for the day.
yeah,
Absolute nicest young man you ever want to meet. Anyway, he'd never seen anything pattern welded that I know of
okay,
in his life. So I'm setting up to do some W's, and I always started with all the rows up to start the C's on them.
yep,
And he says to me, he says, why don't you turn it up like that and do it? And I went, well, I don't know. I did. Now I call that the Caleb Budd method because Caleb Budd showed me that. And because he had never made a knife before, I'm not going to discount that guy. I call it the Caleb Budd method when I teach it. And I
yeah,
set up all my W's like that because it worked. It was a simple observation, but it worked. And that's that.
interesting,
Yeah. And that's, I don't discount anybody because you're going to learn something.
yeah. Yeah, I think there's always an opportunity to learn, especially if you're paying attention and you lack the ego. I think part of the problem is folks get caught up in their own ego, and and then that's when and when you do that, you're putting up walls. You're putting up
Oh,
walls,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
and things can't get through. And then honestly, all that does is hurt you in the end.
Oh,
It leaves you. It
it's a
leaves you behind.
terrible affliction.
Yeah.
I see it. I've seen generations of knife makers, and
Yeah.
you see them come and they start. I got a picture of me and Josh Smith, and he's 13 years old. He's standing about this tall almost, and
Sure.
I'm leaning over his shoulder talking to him about what he's doing. And the guy is a giant in the knife industry now, and
Yeah.
it's funny. Everybody starts somewhere,
Yeah.
and it's just absolutely amazing. But you see them develop, and then you'll see them arrive. And
Sure.
of course, every young male has it in them to establish themselves as an entity. They want to stand on their own. They don't want to be beholden to anybody. That's
Right.
hardwired into your psyche to do that.
Sure.
But you have to learn to strip some of that away in order to keep everything going because we're here temporary. It,
Oh yeah, for
we're in a
sure.
flash in a pan, and you better hurry because I woke up the other morning and I'm an 18-year-old kid stuck in a 75-year-old body, and I'm going, man, I got to hurry. Another day.
Sure.
If I wake up, I go, yay, got another day.
Yeah. Well, something I love. I was just listening back through Jeff Bader's interview with you, um, and one good point he brings up is that you have really done a good job of uh, grabbing hold of life by the tail and just riding along with it, and going on so many different adventures and having so many different experiences. You really have lived enough. You've enjoyed and gotten so much out of life, probably at least for a few people, a family of
Well,
people on
it
your
would
own.
read like fiction. I've done some pretty amazing things, and then
Sure.
it's like my buddy Ben Tata I was just with.
Right.
He met me. I was in the bathroom fighting two guys at the same time and getting my ass whipped. And he
Okay.
came in there and straightened that shit up. And that's that's the reason we've been friends all these years.
Is
And
that one of the times he saved your
it's
life?
a story. It's a story of my life. I just win, but I get in a punch or two. But no, it's I don't want to be sitting on the porch when I can't move talking about what somebody else did. I'm just
Sure.
not going to do it.
Yeah.
That life is too full of living to,
Hmm.
you can't be sad. And I get rid of negative stuff. If it's negative, what you want in life is you want to be moving forward in your life and learning and discovering and enjoying life. And the only person you can control is you. I
Right.
can't control Laura, and she can't control me. I'm not responsible for her happiness, and she's not responsible for mine, but we're going in the same direction,
Yeah.
and we don't let anything negative touch us. If it gets negative, we push that away.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, we're not being mean to you, but we're going here. If you're going over there or going down there, you just go ahead on, and we'll see you.
Yeah.
When you decide to turn and come this way, come on. Love to have you. But if
Yeah.
you're trying to drag our happiness out, it ain't happening. We're done
Sure.
with you.
Yeah.
And that I live my life like that. And I have young friends, and some are female friends that I'm very, very close to. And you see them dealing with the drama and stuff in their life, and then going, "Hey, why don't you
Right.
just turn all that nonsense loose? You,
Yeah.
you can't control anybody else. That's everybody trying to influence everybody else. You can't just control yourself, and that's enough. That
Right.
really is. If you can control yourself and be happy in life, that's what you need to do.
Yeah.
And you know, I have down spells. I have spells where, but I don't ever go deep anymore. I had a teacher, and he's still alive, and he's still one of my closest friends. Is Bob Hare, and the guy is just a genius at living life. And I used to get in these deep depressions. I'd go in his shop and I'd almost be weeping. And he'd look at me and go, "Well, who's running your ship today?" And I
Mm.
said, "Why?" He said, "Well, apparently you're not, because you're in charge of whether you're going to be happy or not, and you're certainly not steering in that direction." And it
Sure.
stuck with me. That was in 1982,
Oh
and
wow.
it stuck with me. And I began to work through it. It took a few years to really get, because you get caught up in life and you have relationships that come and go and sort of
Yeah.
thing. Everything will drag you down if you let it. But I've quit doing that. I'm like
Yeah.
the Teflon Don. That stuff slides off me, and I'm done.
That's a great advice to get. Yeah, and that was 82 was what? You were in your early 30s?
Yeah, I guess you're the math guy. I didn't
I was
get
just
that
trying
gene.
I was just trying to think. You're 76, I'm 37. I'll be 38 soon. And then I was born in 84. So just trying to do a little quick math.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
2 years old or fixing.
I was I wasn't
I
even
was
there
two
yet.
years before you was born when I decided I wasn't going to be depressed anymore.
That's
But
good.
it worked.
Yeah. That was good. Um so you get into powder,
Right.
and you just start running with it and figuring all this stuff out. And are you doing because honestly, like, and other people must have been sharing techniques, but I feel like for a while, um especially through the maybe the 80s, but especially through the 90s, a lot of people were doing pattern or powdered Damascus and doing loaves, especially for folders and
Exactly.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
And from where you started, how did things evolve, and then get to where and to where the guys at Kilroy's and Peter Swartzberg are doing some of the stuff they're doing today.
Oh, that's it. Well, it goes along that timeline. We did the thing with Gary.
Yeah.
And got the introduction to the powder, began to understand powder. Then we began to disseminate the canister stuff.
And you're doing
Then
that
there
at
was
like Hammer In?
that second generation, Matt Deskin and Shane and all those guys are coming along. We went out. I actually coined the term Montana Mafia. Don Fogg and I went out there in the 90s. And those guys were all segregated. They were scattered all over the place, but they came together for that first Hammer In, and it lit a fire in them. And then they were just going crazy because they're all super creative. Every dang one of them makes a better knife than I ever made. But the thing is they were able to apply some of the lessons that Don and I taught, and their work went crazy. Same thing happened when I went to France and Germany. I turned the world upside down over there, and it wasn't me that did it. It was the techniques. I added those techniques in, and then they went nuts with it.
Sure.
Some of my proudest stuff with that was the students that I've had come out of I call them students. Some of them are masters. I mean, I had one kid, this Antonio Fogarizo. You can look up his work. He came with me. He was a young man, and his family had been making knives in Sardinia for 100 years.
Oh, wow.
And so they wanted him to continue the tradition, but he wanted to learn something new. He came, spent 15 days with me, and it wasn't what I taught him that made the difference. It was his mindset and what he did with the knowledge. Yep. Within 2 years, he had gone by me like I was parked. And in his realm of pattern welding, now he does these high-tech folders, genius level high-tech machining and millions of little precision inlays and all that stuff. He's up there he's a Michael Walker of Europe is who he is. I mean, he is that good. And there's like a handful of those guys that are just creative genius. And you look at the stuff they're doing, I mean, crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Jürgen Steinau and I have been friends since he started coming over in 92. That's when the Iron Curtain was still up. We still had the wall. Wow. Right. And that guy was bringing his knives, and one of his knives just sold for $150-something thousand. Woo. Yeah, that's a pretty nice paycheck. But these guys, I've got a little knife that he and I made together. He sat at my bench and made it with hand files with all these little facets and stuff in it out of my steel. It's the only one in the world like it.
Oh, wow.
Kind of stuff. But the teaching is, that's why I enjoy it. I like to see other people successful. And the more successful they become, it's just great for me. That's my payday, is watching somebody succeed with knowledge I've passed on.
Absolutely. Real quick, House Bear Forge just jumped in. He says, "Such a good session. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. You are amazing."
Well, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
That America taught me everything I know.
There's no way. I'm standing on your shoulders. That is for sure.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I get a lot of feedback on the net, and it's highly appreciated. It kind of validates what I'm doing, and that's important. Sure. You see what's coming now. I want to kind of talk on a little bit on the developments. I mean, the stuff is going crazy. And back when I visited Teledyne, all the carbide cutters, projectiles, and all that stuff are made by putting binders in them. And they do a process called kipping, which is a cold isothermal press. They are hard pressed into a machinable part, or they coin them. They actually computer generate these the dies and stuff for them. So they've got the shrinkage built in them. When you buy a carbide cutter today, it's not machined. It comes out of that hydrogen press ready to be laser engraved, and it goes in a box. The cutting edges are on it, It's finished.
Holy shit.
Yeah, using a
Sorry.
binder. And I was
That is
privileged to that
amazing.
knowledge in the 80s. And so
Right.
I started fooling with some of this stuff with this is one of those things where you don't have time to do everything. I'll give you a
Yeah.
couple examples of it. But I started using some binders and making some things, but I didn't follow through with it. And then when I went to Hawaii to go visit Neil, I went over to Peter Burke's place, and he showed me a blade he had made using his clay Damascus method, using the binders. The guy is a scientific genius. He sat down and figured out the exact formulas to make that work. Now, I worked through several different things. I read what was available, and I tried some things, and it worked out okay. But I didn't follow through up on it. This guy has put the song and the dance together. If you go to his Patreon stuff, he will give you a recipe to get started. But you're just scratching the icing on the cake. But he is one of those guys that is meticulous. He writes everything down. He's got a genius level scientific mind. I'm just absolutely amazed. When I saw that first blade, I went, yes, somebody did something with it. Somebody made something with it.
Yeah, I don't have pictures of his first one, but I think his first one was a play on jelly rolls. But I do have a mosaic bar here that he
put
made
that up. That's
using
all
his clay.
Folks, that's all clay.
Yeah, so this is all
and
clay
that guy
work.
He is the one that made this happen.
Yeah.
This is it. I mean, this guy has opened the floodgate in this medium. This thing has no limits to it. No limits to it.
Yeah, and I remember. I was just gonna say, I remember when Peter and I first started learning about some steel making techniques, and we both kind of at the same time were like, what if you could do all the work with steel in a clay form, and then all you had to do was weld it back together, or weld it, set the weld and forge it into a knife.
That's when I saw the first polymer clay books, I went crazy. I've got 10 of them in my shop.
Yeah, right.
Where they've used it, and then my wife has actually done some metal clay herself, but it's silver. It's already pre-made. It's got all the binders in it.
Right.
But I started looking up the formulas for that, but Peter actually did something with it. He made it happen. That's crazy.
This next one is it's a jelly roll feather. And this is all, so what he's been calling these is one weld Damascus, and it's because he's doing this clay work by hand before he even welds up a billet and then forges a knife out of it. And that's
all absolutely cold work. It's all cold work. He's fired it, heats it up, forges it, and he's done.
Yep.
That's
awesome.
A game changer.
So he's doing the same thing with Mokame. And he actually he made a Mokame spacer that I used on a recent project. I have a little bit more left, so I'm thankful for that to use on a future project. But yeah, he's doing really cool stuff with the precious metals. This one's a little bit more refined. This was another feather that was jelly rolls that got feathered, and then he four-weighed them.
He's just started with this because he's working out how to. The problem with this stuff when you mix it is it has all that fine particulate in it.
Yeah.
And it makes it grainy looking, and he's resolving those. He and I've talked about it, and I'll let him
absolutely
elaborate on that, but he's working it out to where those lines now become crystal clear.
Nice. Yep.
Yeah, it's gonna be a game changer. The printed stuff is really cool. What it does is it opens the door to almost anybody with a printer to make whatever they want with that thing, and that's under development. We're doing a lot of research with it, wall thickness and all kinds of things with it. But it's Ron has got a real good handle on it, and he's got a website up, and he will print stuff for you, or weld stuff for you, or weld stuff. If you can do a line drawing, send it to him, he'll print it for you, and then you drop that in a can and go to work. The puzzle. Remember, this goes with any of these techniques. The puzzle is easy. The forging is difficult.
Yes.
That's where the skill sets come in. You can take stuff, a perfect picture, and turn it into a Rorschach test with a few misplaced blows.
Oh my God, that is hilarious. The image that I just had was some like this beautiful mosaic that just got splattered onto a wall.
Oh yeah, it goes,
Yeah.
and you can't get it back.
No.
It's one of those golly gee, I wish that hadn't happened thing.
Yep.
And then you
The
roll
key
around
is
on the
hopefully you're
floor and
paying
bite the
attention so
bark
you can
off
learn.
of trees and talk ugly. And
Yep.
hope you swept the shop floor.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when on my old carvings, I used to carve. I'd take fossil ivory and I'd carve these little teeth in these goblins I'd make. I'd be
Oh
carving
yeah.
along on that little tiny tooth, all of a sudden go boop off in the shop, and it's like, oh man, boop, not another one. And then I found out there's a fish that lives in Florida. It's called a bowfin, and in Louisiana they call it a shoe pick or a grenland.
Okay.
But it's got a mouthful of perfect teeth.
Okay.
And so I catch those fish, and I'd cut the jaws out of them, I'd dry the jaws, and I got a box full of perfect teeth. I just pick out the one I want and put it in.
That's smart. That way you're just inlaying teeth. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really excited about this article when it comes out. I think people are going to really appreciate having that reference of your knowledge and understanding of the history, especially around powdered steel and the development of pattern welding using powdered steel, and everybody that's been involved along the way. I think it's really incredible. It's like you said, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, going back hundreds, if not thousands, of years, and I think that's something important to remember because it. I often sometimes I'm like, because I do the same thing where I'm trying to chase, I gotta create something cool that nobody's done before, but it's not. I can't do what I'm doing without your help or other makers like Ed Shemp and forgers who have done so much work to get us to where we're at today.
Oh, Ed, I love Ed. Ed and I done a bunch of stuff together back in the old days. We did more, but he sent me one time. He sent me, it was a half a blade, and I never could. You tend to overthink things, when you see somebody do something that's really cool, and you trying to figure out how they do that,
Yeah.
And he used to make these multi-bar mosaics that wide, and
Oh wow.
I was trying to figure out how he did it. I was overthinking it. I was thinking, man, he's fitting all those together. I'm having fitting the panels down the side and getting them to work. But he was doing this thing like these big panels on both sides with all this stuff in it. He was making a loaf and sawing the stuff off and sticking it on there. Well, he made this one and it had a dozen different patterns in it, and he put a 52-100 core in it. And when he quenched it, it peeled right down the middle. It shattered that 52, tore that mono steel down the middle, but the pattern didn't break. I still have that thing in my box upstairs. I look at it and going, yeah, that's one of those.
That's one of those hard lessons learned.
Oh my gosh. Well, you got new people coming like Josh Prince. That guy he works in the most primitive conditions you ever saw, but he does magic. He's absolutely a genius with stuff. And then Salem, Salem is, I wish I had him adopted as a kid. He'd never get out of my shop. It's just amazing stuff. I don't know what happened here. Hold on a second. I'm going to try to get rid of something popped up on my, oh, there it is. I got rid of it. Anyway, but the new guys out there, and never let Charles Leinhart in your shop. He showed up at my shop. He said, I'm going to come up for the day. And I thought, well, okay, we'll chat and hang out and maybe have a drink or something. And he comes up and he's there like 8:30 in the morning. He says, I want to make a primrose pattern. I said, well, what the hell is a primrose pattern? And he came out with this big tile sheet.
Yeah.
And I said, how many days do you have, Charlie? He said, oh, I'm just here for the day. I went, oh, crap. Here we go. Anyway, we got it done. But we sawed material, precision cut stuff on a bandsaw, which is not precision cut, but it's close, till 4:30 that afternoon. And we were like 11 o'clock at night finishing the weld on it, but we got it done. And then he has since done better ones.
Yeah.
Just like this mountain scene I just did with this young guy. He wanted to fold all that stuff up. He folded nickel for hours. I don't know how his fingers didn't fall off. And then we put all it together and made that mountain scene. There are things that we would have changed about it. You know, you always in hindsight see something that you could have done better, but it really came out nice for the amount of time we had. We had 3 days of work in that thing, and it had a river and birds flying and trees. And one guy sent me a note, said, I don't agree with the trees. And I said, well, I tell you what you do. You post a picture of the one you did in 3 days and see how your trees look. Yeah, it's like, the branches are all wrong. That's the reason when I carve, I always do these goblins and stuff, fantasy stuff. You know, it's always fantasy because it's always correct. Because I used to carve an eagle or something. I'd carve an eagle, and there's always this guy with a pocket full of pencils walks up to you and goes, what time a year did you do the study of this eagle? It's missing 3 flight feathers. Oh,
my God.
Oh, yeah. And I said, what is it about? Get away from my table before I kill you. You don't understand. But, Jaden, the young man that's here, he did something that it blew me away. I actually took pictures of it. I'm stealing his idea. I'm publishing this nationally. I'm stealing his idea. He did a takedown chef knife.
Oh, wow.
And it was the most unique thing I have seen. It's simple. The simple ideas are always a good one. But he made this little square peg that went through it and locked that thing in. It forged a titanium handle for it. And that's like, I wonder who's supplying his belts because that titanium oxide is terrible. But he made this thing and it all pins up and it locks up and it's perfect. And I thought you could see it. James Semensky is who he is. He calls himself Slacksmith. I'll give him a plug right here. But he's worth knowing. Really sharp kid. If he doesn't kill himself doing eyeline work.
Well, he was at Kilroy's when you guys did the 3D print.
Yeah, stuff, right? He was there. That's where I met him. And then he came down to the shop to study with me. Right. And man, we had a ball. We just absolutely had a ball. He's got me a slack line. He's going to try to kill me.
He set you up?
Yeah, I've got one. And so he juggles while he's not working. That's the damn thing you ever see. Yeah, I'm up to 1 ball now, and I can do that pretty good. Of course, I feel better because Henning Wilkerson, he can't do any. He can't even juggle one. I hope you barely like walk. That, Henning. But
so much of the industry today owes so much thanks to you and what you have pioneered in pattern development, and especially around the canister and powdered steels. And you know, I'm thankful to you for your friendship and your mentorship, and for being somebody that I can call on every once in a while. I feel bad. I feel like I always call you when I'm in a hard spot instead of just to say hi every once in a while.
Hey, so that's what friends are for.
I'll have to do that more often. But
hey, I'll give you an umbrella when it's raining. Most people will not.
I appreciate it.
Before
we call it a show, we do have a couple questions, and and we'll just get through them real quick, and then if anybody in the chat, let me double check the chat. No, Tony Stasma in the chat said, the legend. He's probably forgotten more than I've learned in a lifetime. Okay, we do have one really good question from Jeroen Nippenberg. He says, hi, Steve. 2 questions for you. So I'll just start with the first one, then we'll finish up with the second. The first question is, what really stands out in your canister Damascus patterns is the clean, recognizable shapes and figures. How do you manage to get so little pattern distortion during forging? So like your hunter in the hunting scene.
Yeah, that's what sets my work apart. I think more than anything is control of forging. Yeah. And it's a very, very difficult thing to teach. I can teach you the techniques. It's like a martial arts, and then you do a motion so many times. I have
Yeah.
to feel what's going on through the machines. And I'm not trying to be mystical about it all. It's just
Sure.
it's time on the tools. But I, the probably the neatest thing I've added to my shop in years is that computerized 50-ton press,
That coal
because
iron
I can
press.
control within a hundredth of an inch how far
Yep.
I'm pushing anything.
Yep.
The other thing is if you don't have a machine like that, or you're trying to work in a press or whatever at home, you have to figure what I call the percentage thing. If you've got a square, you want to be 70% inside of that, and that'll keep that's a out of the air, but about 70% in order so that the motion of the outside of the bar doesn't distort the interior. The more
I got you.
material you have around the image, the better chance you are of it surviving. If you get in a press or in a hammer and get in a big hurry and overhit that thing, you can move it and you won't get it back. Now you can get by with curves. I just did a Cape Buffalo and a man in a block, or it's going in a block. I'm working on a collab with Henning
Yeah.
Wilkerson, and look at his work in South Africa. The guy is freaking amazing. I went all the way to
He's
South
amazing.
Africa just to watch him work. But
He's astonishing.
it's crazy stuff. Anyway, but the puzzle, you can move a curve and it's still a curve, but you move a straight line and it's bent. It's a curve. It's never coming back. It's almost a total impossibility to get it back out. You can, but it's not worth the effort. It's just really, it's a nightmare scenario. So you want to be 70% in and go slowly. If it takes you 20 heats to work the thing, do 20 heats. Don't try to get it done in 3. Everybody's in a big rush to get a result, and that's 90% or more of the problem with most knife makers today. They get in a big damn rush. I got to get this done. I need money for the rent or whatever. Yeah. Take your time and get it right. If you're going to do one of those puzzles, the puzzle is easy. The forging is difficult. You have to do it in sections. It's just like when we brought that mountain scene down. I overpushed that a couple of times, but I was able to get by with it because all that stuff in there is curves. There were very few straight lines in it at all. You don't see straight lines in nature. So I was able to work it out by very carefully massaging the thing. Had I to do that over again, I would have displayed that thing in windows where I had a piece of a mountain here, a piece of a mountain here, like you're looking out through a plate glass window.
Right.
And that would have been the better way. But we tried to marry everything up, machine it, marry it up, and it worked pretty well. Matter of fact, the deeper in the block you got, the cleaner it got. But that's what happens. You always get distortion on the ends. And that's why my canisters, I always in push them first. Always at least a quarter inch to 3/8 of an inch, a half inch on some can first, and then I start working the sides.
I have it. I'll jump back to the picture of the Sasquatch. So that explains to me why there's kind of that buffer region around the outside of the Sasquatch.
Exactly. If that guy was up next to the edge, it would tear his arms and legs off if he went too hard.
Right. That's perfect. That's a great explanation. All right. And so the second part of his questions, he says, with your pioneering in Damascus, making for years and years, what do you think is the future of Damascus steel? Where do you see Damascus going?
I don't see much limit on it. You're contained by Newtonian physics, and in material science today, they're finding ways around everything. I mean, they're making boron grids that are stronger than graphene. If you don't know what graphene is, look it up. I'm a material science junkie. I love studying very tough, resilient materials and what they do, and that part of science has always fascinated me.
Sure.
And, but you really need to understand how the material moves and flows. And if you don't know anything about science, oxygen's bad for anything that you want to try to connect together. It will cause you problems. Oxygen will rob all the electrons off your stuff and make an oxide out of it, and you won't be happy.
Yeah.
How about that?
That's great. That's great. Yeah, the future of Damascus making. I agree. I don't know if there's much of a limit on it. I think
It's
people are
not.
just going to keep doing very interesting stuff, especially as they start incorporating some of the new techniques with the 3D printed shapes, or even Peter's Damascus,
Right.
um, and figuring out how to mix that even with solid elements in the future. I'm sure is going to
Oh,
also,
and know your materials. I mean, you
yeah,
have to know your materials. I see a lot of stuff, and I'm not knocking anybody. I think what they're doing with the copper is beautiful, but you will never see a copper pan in a kitchen that doesn't have tin in it, and it has tin in it for a reason. Copper's a heavy metal, and it's
yeah,
not good for you. So
yeah,
anyway, I'll leave that alone. I don't want to be Chicken Little. I think what they're doing is great, and there's some guys using the printed stuff, and they're putting copper stuff in bolsters and all. It's beautiful, and
yeah.
some of the patination that's being done out there. There's like books on patinas that you can get. You can turn. Oh, that's always triggers another memory. You
Okay,
ready? I'll
yeah.
give
Let's
you
hear.
another one. It's funny. You know who Gustafsson is? The
No.
Swedish kid that does all the colored Damascus, bright oranges and greens.
Uh-uh.
All that's
I
you
gotta
should
pull it
look
up.
him up. He's in. I tell you where his work is displayed in that Dr. Jerome's book on custom folding knives. It's just crazy. This stuff. His name's Gustafsson. I'm pretty sure he's Swedish. If I got that wrong, he can kill me later with a sword or something. Back in the early part of my pattern welding, I started adding nickel for color, and never on a cutting edge because it'll roll up like an old cat wanting its belly rubbed. And I've been using cold blue to get my color gradients in my steel.
Oh
I'd
yeah.
etch them and
Okay.
then rub it. Well, I ran out of the cold blue, but I had a friend of mine that had a hot blue tank up in a little village north of me. And I ran up there and I had him put my nickel Damascus in that. And it came out and it had bright iridescent green stripes all where the nickel was. And I went, oh, what have you done to my stuff? I was stupid. I didn't capitalize on that. I couldn't wait to get that green off there. I didn't know what it was. I thought, man,
Right.
that's stupid. And then I saw Gustafsson's work, and he had the opposite reaction when he saw that. He went, ooh, how can I
Yeah.
get other colors, and what do I have to put in there to make it happen? See, he
Right.
ran with it. He ran with it,
Yeah.
and I wasn't smart enough to get it. And so
That's
you look
wild.
around at these guys that are developing techniques, and it'll come out of nowhere. There'll be somebody do something amazing, just absolutely amazing. And you don't have to follow all of them, but you get as many of them as you can.
Absolutely. Well, and it's what's crazy is there's so many different colors just on one
It's
piece.
all
I like
alloys.
yeah. And
It's all the same bath, but it's alloys.
interesting. Yeah, so
Now
if you
I manipulated that stuff for a while using heat technique. And what I would do is I'd do all my dark colors first, and then I would erase
interesting.
where I want them to. I
Yep.
scrub it off, and then I go in with a lower temperature
Yeah.
until I got a color gradient that I wanted.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, so if people look up Johann Gustafsson, it's
Yeah, he's amazing.
Johan
Yeah,
Gustafsson. Just look up Johann Gustafsson knives, and you'll see some really cool stuff.
yeah, it's amazing what he did with the color.
Yeah, yeah, that's astonishing. Well, that's what we got for questions. I want to know what's for dinner tonight. Oh, I guess you guys
What?
are. Did you guys already do dinner? Kind of
Yeah,
late.
well, we're in Florida.
Yeah,
I'm
I keep
3 hours behind you. My
Yep.
tapeworms have to feed. Uh, Laura made me a bunch of stir-fried vegetables,
That sounds awesome.
and it was good. And I think we had salmon yesterday,
Nice.
but she feeds me good. I try to keep my health up with my diet. I've got diabetes and have had it for years, and I manage it
Sure.
with my diet.
That's
And
good.
so I try to keep myself as healthy as possible because I got a lot of stuff to do yet. I'm
You
just
still
getting
got a lot of
started.
work to do. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate your time. I also just want to say thank you again to everybody for your support in the Patreon to help make these conversations a reality. I actually want to leave everybody with one last magical picture of Steve levitating in front of his hammer in the forge while he's petting his dog and reading a book. He's levitating, laying back. That's a good trick. I saw you taught that to Mr. Will Stelter.
Yeah, we popped another one for Will. Of course, he was a little fluffier than I am. I had to use a different device.
I got you. So, thank you everybody, and thank you, Steve. It was a great pleasure, and I appreciate you taking the time to share with us what you know and understand, and the wisdom that you've gained over the years. Really means a lot.
I appreciate it. And I love you guys and I miss you. Everybody says, why do you tell your friends you love them? Because you never know when they're going to be gone.
Absolutely.
And that's a fact.
That is a fact. And I can't wait. I want to get down to you and do some work with you sooner than later.
Your room's ready.
My room's ready.
I'm sitting in it.
There you go. And my brother doesn't live far from you, so it's a quick jaunt to your place from there.
Absolutely.
So we'll make it happen.
You got it.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you. Thanks for inviting me on. You're doing a great job, and this is part of it.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. I'm trying. Don't hang up on me quite yet. I'm going to hang up on everybody else.
All right. You got it.
Thank you, everybody.
See you. Out.
We'll see you. We're out.